Okay.
Hello, my name is Harry French, and I'm the program manager of the Climatewise Business Network here at the Windfall Ecology Center. I'd like to introduce my colleague Audrey Baines, who you've heard, who is our technical coordinator today and also be facilitating a large portion of the sessions. The focus of our topic today is captured by the words, "You can't manage what you don't measure." This is the fourth in a series of informative webinars targeted at business tenants in commercial buildings. The commercial real estate sector in York Region, and in fact, throughout the GHDA, provides a workplace location for a significant number of businesses. These are businesses who lease space for their offices, warehousing, or distribution facilities. They are industrial, condominiums, or retail shopping venues. More than likely, they are SMEs with customer-facing or B2B relationships. They are often isolated from other businesses in their building, yet they share common space and utility infrastructure. Why are we focused on this segment? Because they are left out of the opportunity to take action on climate change. Because they have the most to gain by their customers and suppliers in being recognized for their climate action efforts, and because they are in a pivotal position to influence their building property owners in the adoption of practices that contribute to reducing building greenhouse gas emissions. What they need and what we're going to provide is a roadmap, greenhouse gas emission reductions, including how your business can benefit and understanding the critical signpost as you move towards the recognition destination for your sustainability activities. Next slide, please. We're thrilled to welcome Ephraim Spiegelman, Chief Revenue Officer for Karma Corporation, and Daniel Young, Director of Commercial Services at Metergy. They'll introduce themselves later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. The Climatewise Building Challenge is a York Region-wide friendly competition that is a reward competition created to reduce greenhouse gas emission reductions and to save you money through your activities and through collaboration and education with your landlords. It's a free competition open to York Region businesses. We provide you with the tools and focus to make it happen in your building or in your business. Climatewise Building Challenge is a program that is sponsored by the Windfall Ecology Center. The Windfall Ecology Center is a not-for-profit social enterprise dedicated to building sustainable communities. Windfall has served the York Region community for over 20 years. The center's activities focus on empowering communities to create long-lasting wealth in a carbon-constrained country. Next slide, please. The webinar uses the metaphor of a roadmap. On a journey together. The webinar is a signpost in the journey, pointing our listeners in the right direction and taking action on climate change. The end of the journey is the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and the recognition of your business for taking action on climate change. When it comes to energy performance, building owners and tenants have similar building goals. Both want to save money, be recognized for corporate responsibility efforts, and engage stakeholders and have transparent access to energy consumption material. Next slide, please. We'll cover many areas today. Takeaway is owners and tenants need to make submetering a priority as a means to reducing greenhouse gas emissions while saving money. Please. I'm happy to now turn over the moderation of the webinar to my colleague, Audrey Baines, to introduce the speakers, and Audrey will guide us through a facilitated discussion designed to maximize your ability to set up collaborative relationships between tenants and landlords to take action on emission reductions. Audrey, thanks very much.
Thanks for the great introduction, Harry, and the idea of what this presentation is about and what Climatewise Building Challenge is about. And now we have our two presenters, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So Ephraim, if you would like to go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Audrey, and appreciate the opportunity to be here today. So briefly, my name is Ephraim Spiegelman. I'm Karma's Chief Revenue Officer. Really what that means is that is a big fancy title for being part of the sales and business development and marketing and operations and finance and everything else that comes along with it. But the truth is that we've got lots of great experts behind the scenes that really bring what we do every day to life. I've been in B2B for pretty much my entire career over the better part of 25 years. I've been within the submetering sector or industry for the better part of about 8 or 9 now. And it's been a really interesting shift, as we've seen over the course of the past almost decade, from everything that we are learning as the submetering experts to what we're seeing in the industry across the country to some of the new ideas that we're able to bring to the table. So maybe I'll end it there and hand it over to Daniel to introduce himself.
There you go. Go ahead.
Thanks so much, Ephraim. Yeah, thanks, Harry and Audrey, for having me today. My name is Daniel Young. I am the Director of Commercial Services with Measurable Solutions. Measurable is one of Canada's largest submetering providers. We've got more than 15 years experience, and our focus is really delivering end-to-end submetering solutions for our clients. My professional experience has been focused on implementing operational technology in commercial real estate, and submetering certainly falls directly in the middle of that. So I'm excited to be here today and share my experience with everyone. Thank you.
Well, we have a lot of people online now interested in hearing and learning all about submetering. So on to our presentation. What is submetering? So I am not a submetering expert, and I had to do a little bit of research here to prepare these slides with the support and backup from Ephraim and Daniel. But what I learned was that you can do submetering for all these different hardware systems, being electrical, natural gas, water, and heating and cooling. So basically the operations of your building. What we need to have is access to more granular energy data to make targeted performance investments and improvements. That's how we do it. We analyze the data. That is your key here. And so that's why submetering is so incredibly important, and why as a business, how can you manage what you can't measure unless you are submetered? So question will have Ephraim come first with an answer to this question. How often do buildings submeter all 4 utilities?
It's a loaded question, Audrey. The truth is that no two buildings are alike. So, at Karma, we've been doing this for the better part of almost 42 years now. And what I can say is, in all the major cities across Canada, specifically some in the US, and specifically here in York Region, again, no two buildings are alike. So what I would say is it's important to take a bit of a step back and really think about what it is that you're trying to achieve. So the truth is that we can measure, this doesn't just relate to submetering. You can measure whatever you like, and you can get as much data as you possibly can, but what are you actually going to be able to do with that data? So at the highest levels, what is submetering? Submetering is the ability to, essentially, you're paying for what you use. So you are not allocating anymore. We like to use the term or the phrase measurable and defendable. So everything that we read and bill on is not only measurable, but we can actually defend it. So, if someone's using 20 kilowatts of electricity or 50 gallons of liters of water, they are actually using those 50 liters of water. It's not just an allocation. So people in a build, if you think about it from a building perspective, folks are not simply just being allocated the commodity expense as part of their rent. In a submetered building, not only are we seeing a reduction in overall usage, because again, it's a pay-per-use model where people are now responsible for what it is that they're using. So they're a little bit more conscious of it. We actually care about what we're doing as well. We care about the environment. We care about reducing carbon footprint and all of that. all that good stuff. But the reality is that, you know, when you take a look at bottom lines, we're all in business. When you take a look at bottom lines, you're able to actually reduce, not only because people are now a little bit more conscious, but you make them a little bit more responsible for what it is that they're using. So to answer the question, to make a long story short, how often do we see all 4 utilities submetered? It really depends. There's no definite answer. I would argue, and you know, Daniel, I'll hand it over to you, but I would argue electricity and water are probably the most common, and then gas and thermal or BTU metering would kind of come along if needed or necessary, depend on the audits that we would do as, you know, as the experts coming in.
I 100% agree with you, Ephraim, and I think just to elaborate a little bit on you know, the different differences between different properties. Like what it boils down to is the tenants that you have in the building and your utility account configuration. And what I mean by that, I'll give you an example, is if you have a strip mall with one restaurant using, you know, gas consuming equipment, and their neighbor is perhaps a salon that doesn't use very much gas at all. That's a great example of why you would want to submeter gas in that building. In an office building, submetering gas might not make so much sense. So 100% echo what Ephraim is saying. It really depends on the application.
Well, thank you to you both. That makes a lot of sense. It depends on who's in the building and what they're doing. That's what I'm understanding. All right, let's go on to the next slide. So why do we need to submeter? We've sort of answered that in a little bit, but let's go deeper. I love this statement that I found because it you know, relates to our roadmap analogy. Using a space with no meter is like buying a car with no gas gauge or speedometer. I think that's just lovely. And so you need to know what's going on in your space. You need to have an understanding at all times. So how are tenants typically allocated utility costs? Well, I've had a few conversations where sometimes they don't know the utility costs for months and months later, sometimes not until the end of the year. So that is difficult for a tenant to understand and budget and create energy savings when they don't have their eyes on what's happening with that speedometer. And so we have the idea of a tenant's proportionate square footage that can be used, and they try to budget each year. So how does one tenant not end up paying for another tenant's behavior is what we're getting down to here. And Ephraim, I'm going to let you start, but I'm going to give you a 1 minute deadline, and Harry's going to, so that we can hear from Daniel. So let's start, Ephraim.
Sounds good. It's a hard deadline to give a sales guy, but I will try. I will try.
I'm going to narrow it down a little bit. So how are the main load costs, the common areas, separated from the individual meters, which might also answer how is one tenant space separated from another tenant space? So
great way to frame it. So again, we like the term measurable and defendable. So when we hear the word allocation, it tends to really, you know, get our backs up against the wall. Number one, because allocations, you know, if you can prevent if you can avoid doing allocations, it's likely the way to go. So I think there's 2 ways to look at it. In a retrofit commercial setting, there's a good opportunity, or there's a good chance after we do an audit and actually visit the site, that we'll probably be able to do electricity and water at least. And we'll take a look and we will put meters in specifically for the units that are dedicated, so that we're measuring the specific usage that those specific units are using for electricity and water, and potentially some other services. The common area loads will be the difference. Obviously, in some cases, we will measure common areas. So, and as an example, you know, just at a high level, and we can get into the details, we might measure lights and plugs as an example for common areas, hallways, lobby, whatever the case may be, and get into the details from there. I'll hand it over to Daniel since I got the virtual hook.
You got the hard stuff.
Yeah.
No, I think it makes a lot of sense what Ephraim is saying. I agree. I think you pointed this out, Audrey. What's really important to understand is how costs are passed through to tenants in the commercial space. And if you get an electricity bill for the property, all of the costs from that electricity bill, if they're paid for by the property owner and manager, are going to be passed through to the tenants. And so the question is, how do you do that? You talked a little bit about square foot allocation, which is the way you do it without submeters. And in that case, to your example, some tenants will get a free ride more so than others, and so that's why submetering is really important, is to capture the disproportionate users, make sure they pay for what they use, and that's really what it boils down to. And in terms of the common area element, I think Ephraim is right. Those costs still get passed through to the tenants, but it's now the difference between every individual tenant's use and the total bill. And typically the common area use will get passed through on a pro rata basis or a share of building area basis. So yeah, I agree.
Just to close off that point, Audrey, maybe just really briefly, Daniel, I like what you just said. And then the whole idea of creating a building or an opportunity that's a little bit more marketable, to folks that are looking to rent from you. So, just like Daniel said, if you're actually paying for what you use, and folks are now going to be responsible for what they use versus subsidizing their neighbor, all of a sudden your building becomes a little bit more marketable to potentially the building across the street or next door. So it's something to keep at the back of your minds.
Big benefit. Thank you for adding that, Ephraim. And I really, I caught what you said about counting plugs and lights, which is another interesting idea. Square footage is one thing, but how many plugs and lights do you have? Or do you have a piece of equipment in your unit that is an energy hog? I don't know what it might be, maybe a dryer or whatever business you're in. But square footage is not quite the magic answer, is it, when you really think about it? Okay, so just a note here on what is Measurement Canada's role. I did not know about Measurement Canada before I started researching this. And of course, there's a governing body behind all the submetering. And so we have Measurement Canada that is going to be responsible to watch what the providers are doing, and they're only allowed to install approved equipment and report all the metering systems that they do install and keep quality documents. I mean, these are all really just ways to make any of the providers accountable. So over to you first, Daniel. What are the benefits of the revenue grade meters approved by Measurement Canada?
Yeah, great question. And I'm going to try and not go into too much detail here because this is a very, very deep topic, as you can imagine. So at a very high level, you're right, Measurement Canada's role is they're responsible for ensuring that the end user, the tenant, is being billed fairly and accurately. And so there's a lot of processes that are designed by the Measurement Canada program to protect the end user. And so anytime somebody asks me, should we install Measurement Canada approved meters? Is it worth it? Do you have to pay a little bit more for it? The answer is always, submetering is complicated. It doesn't seem like it on the surface, but those Measurement Canada processes are designed to protect the end user, and they're there for a reason. And I guess what I would argue is, by going with the Revenue Canada grade meters and making sure that your provider follows those processes, you can gain confidence in your investment, meaning the submeters you just installed are going to be working properly. On the flip side, you can spend a fair amount of money on submeters that aren't Measurement Canada approved, and if they're not installed properly or they're not the right meter, they're really not giving you the data that you need. And so that's kind of how I'd characterize it.
Okay, thank you very much. Over to you, Ephraim.
Yeah, I would say, just to supplement that, Daniel's company as well as ours, we are licensed, we are registered. It's important to work, just like anything else. It's important to work with a company that kind of knows what they're doing. The reality is that any of us could go to your local hardware store, or whatever the case may be, and buy in electricity's in the case of electricity, buy a check meter if that's what you're interested in. But then what? So the meter's spinning, what's actually happening? How are you actually reading and billing, if that's what your end goal is? Or potentially you just want the check meter in place, and that's okay in certain circumstances. But the reality is there is a lot that goes into what it is that Daniel does and what our team does behind the scenes. It's not simply just putting in a piece of hardware and hoping for the best.
So there you go, folks. Better to have the governing body behind you on this, is my take on this. All right, let's learn a little bit about submeters and how they've changed over the years. So I am familiar with the bubble meter, the one on the right. That's what I see. That's what's been, visible to us as the public. So there are many different kinds of submeters that we need to think about, and we have to understand what is the bubble meter versus the submetering box. And we need to understand that from our experts here. And so I'm going to have Ephraim, you're up next. We'll give you each 1 minute.
Great. Well, bubble meter is definitely the technical term, so I can follow along those lines. But the reality is, a bubble meter or a single point meter is something that you would likely see, on the side of a house or whatever the case may be. And there's still a time and place for that single point meter. The reality is that it takes up space, and especially if you have 20 or 30 or 50 units in your building or commercial setting, all of a sudden you have a meter stack, as it's called, or a room dedicated specifically to these meters, because you essentially need 1 meter per unit. In our world, we use smart meters, smart multi-point meters, which is you can see an image of it on your screen. The footprint is much smaller. We tend to put them in a mechanical room, whatever the case may be, and they're able to manage a significant amount of units versus one at a time. So all of a sudden, and I'll end it here, Harry, I saw your hand. So all of a sudden, we are taking up less of a footprint. You now have extra space that's either leasable or rentable or sellable, depending on your setting, and we can go from there.
Okay, over to you, Daniel. And there's one thing I'd like to add, Daniel, is, as an aside, how are these done? Are they sort of a Bluetooth thing, or is it? I'm wondering about that piece of it, because is it wires, or is it, a little detail would be great.
Yeah, no, that's great question. And again, I agree with everything Ephraim said. We at Metergy, we also offer the multi-point metering on the electricity side. I'm actually going to focus a little bit on kind of water and gas, because we haven't talked about that so much. And then I'll touch on your point, Audrey. So going back to something Ephraim said earlier about understanding the building, the meter that you select really depends on the infrastructure you have in place, your physical building attributes. So what I mean by that is, what are your water line sizes? How do you properly size a water meter for the tenant that is in there? How much water is that tenant using? And it all makes a difference, and it all impacts the meters that you select. The infrastructure point that I talked about, do you have internet in the rooms that we need to install the meters in, or are we going to use a wireless communication between the different meters? So there's all sorts of different options that you can go with. And I think the real point here is, we've said this a couple of times, but there is value in going to your submetering vendor to right size your application. Talk with somebody about your application, and don't just go and buy a meter and install it. We see all too many times that a meter is specified on an engineering drawing, and the consultant will, they'll put a meter in there, and then we show up, or Ephraim shows up, and we look at it and go, sorry guys, you can't use that meter. And it's a bit of a waste of money and a waste of time. So yeah, the recommendation is talk to your vendor, right size the application, and I think you'll be happy with the result.
Right, that's why we have experts, so we don't have the wrong equipment and the wrong application, because it sounds complicated. There's a lot of factors to consider. Thank you, guys. All right, so everyone always wants to know, like, what's involved in installing submetering. I chose a fun little cartoon guy who's got a million things going on at once, because I get the impression there are a lot of things for you guys to consider when you're installing it. So we've got management of the project. We've got worrying about productivity loss during the installation and labor. And then there's, of course, the commissioning, where everything's being tested, reliability of hardware and sensors. So really, when you work with your tenants in a building, what are the challenges for making the installation happen? And we're going to start with Daniel.
Perfect, thanks, Audrey. And Ephraim, I encourage you to jump in at any point if you want to challenge what I said or add to it. I'm happy to go back and forth. So a lot of the times in commercial space, we'll see retrofit and that means you've got existing infrastructure and you're trying to put a meter on the existing infrastructure, and a whole bunch of challenges with that. We won't go too deep, but generally tenant disruptions are things you need to think about. So if you're doing water, again, you have to shut the water off to your tenants. Electricity, you need to plan for electricity shutdowns. Space access, a lot of the times we'll see that maybe the water lines are drywalled over, and so how do you get around that? And so these are all of the considerations to retrofit. Again, as a submetering vendor, both Karma and Metergy will address these problems, but certainly things do come up. I like what you said earlier, Audrey, about the communications. That's always a challenge. Again, in retrofit, if you've got walls with no data communications between all of the different electrical rooms or what have you, how are you going to make sure that your meters that you've installed are communicating the data properly? And I think just sparked something with me. I think Ephraim and I have assumed that everybody knows you're not manually reading these meters, but maybe that shouldn't be an assumption. When we put meters in, we're generally not relying on manual reads. We want to connect them so that the data comes out easily. And sorry, I saw I went over time there, so go ahead, Ephraim.
Yeah, to be honest, there was no reason for me to cut you off because I completely agree that the truth is, whether you choose Metergy or Karma, both companies are probably really good at what it is that they do. There's going to be some slight differences, that some relationships and those kind of things that come into play. The few things I would add briefly are education. Is a big piece of what it is that we do. So, it's not simply showing up and fitting a square peg in a round hole kind of thing. It's, we won't say yes to every job either. And I know Daniel's philosophy is the same. It's really a matter of assessing, bringing the experts in. So, I can speak from our side of things, with everything being under one roof, we actually care about not only, getting a partnership off the ground, but how the end occupant or tenant is going to react to what it is that we are agreeing to around the board table or around the Teams or Zoom meeting or whatever the case may be. So, education, onboarding, and making sure that folks are coming into this thing with eyes wide open so that they know exactly what it is that they're getting themselves into. And that could be something as simple as, the education could be, like Daniel said, we're not showing up every month with a wand, reading a meter. That's old technology. That's in the past. We now, everything's through the cloud and everything's read remotely. And it could be as simple as showing people a statement at the end of the month or an invoice so that they know exactly what it's going to look like. Walk them through it before the program ever gets up on the ground, just so that people know that once it is energized, they know exactly what they're getting themselves into.
Yes, very good. And, you just made me realize that there's a question here I'd just like to add, and I think we're okay, Harry, for time. And I'm just curious, after having no visibility to your energy use since you've been a tenant there, however long that's been, and then suddenly having visibility to your energy use, do you get a lot of calls from tenants going, hey, this can't be right because I can't believe this is happening? Is there anything that happens like that? There are big surprises?
Yeah, the reason why I'm smirking is that there is a person at our shop who heads up our call center and billing and onboarding by the name of Cassandra Nelson. And she would argue that, yes, every time we get a new building, whether it's multi-residential or commercial up and running, people will always complain about, there's no way I use that much electricity, or there's no way I use that much water. And the truth is, the meters don't lie. I mean, anything's possible, but 11 times out of 10, the meters don't lie. So of course, we'll ask them questions and we may even investigate, but chances are they had no clue how much water or electricity or gas or thermal energy they were using. And now being on a meter system, they become a little bit more conscious. So, as an industry, we know that a metered building, at least in its first year, we'll see, somewhere in the range of a 35% savings, just because, let's call it 30 to 40, just because people are now conscious of what it is that they're using, and they're turning lights off and they're turning the water off because they're responsible at the end of the day for the consumption going through.
All right. And I want to ask one other question to Daniel in that same segue into, has data collection alerted to any situations that were never tagged before, like a water leak or something running on so that there's too much consumption of, power or water that you now are able to fix.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so talking about the call center, having customers call in and to Ephraim's point, why is my bill so high? A lot of the times that is kind of a trigger to say, well, hold on, maybe there's an issue here, and we need to fix that. Or you can have a look at how you're using water, and you can respond to that and trim it and see those reductions. I think, with everything being in the cloud now, I love that, Ephraim, you used that word, because that is where everything is heading, right? Everything being in the cloud now, having access to that data, and having data that is not just monthly data anymore, it's hourly or daily data. There are certainly opportunities out there to flag water leaks on a more regular, more frequent basis. Because I think the way it has been done in the past is the property would get a bill 2 months after they've used the water, and they go, oh shoot, our bill is much higher this month, and by the way, there's a leaking valve up in the penthouse or something like that. So to your point, Audrey, getting more granular data, I think, opens up those opportunities.
Really big benefits. This is really great. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the collaboration between the building owner and the tenants, because this is where it all lies as a foundation for success. So what we need to understand is, when you are now part of the solution, as the tenant is becoming now the part of the solution. So how do we have that conversation before they have the evidence? So, you've been hired by the building owner, I presume, and maybe the tenants have asked to move into this area, but the building owner contacts you, and now you start to have conversations. You need to help the business owners and tenants understand the benefits to them. You're having conversations between both parties. How do you convince them of the shared objectives and how they will immediately benefit? What does that look like? Let's go over to Ephraim first.
Sure. So again, people are going to, it's all about education and the onboarding process, number one. And people are also going to be responsible for what it is that they're using. I liked what Daniel said before about, you have different tenants in a building, and certain people will use more of a commodity than others. Some of the examples I can think of off the top of my head is, there's a number of strip malls that we would do specifically in York Region. And though, a strip mall could have a coffee shop, maybe a smaller restaurant, and then they might have a tailor shop or an accounting firm. Well, the reality is that in the old days, that accounting firm and that tailor shop were going to be allocated a cost for the commodity based on square footage, independent of what it is that they were using. So we all know that the coffee shop is likely using more water than an accounting firm with 1 or 2 people in it, who are maybe not even there full time. All of a sudden, in a metered situation, that accounting firm is going to be paying for what it is that they're using. And I know we mentioned it already, but when people become a little bit more conscious of what it is that they're using, the pay-per-use model, they tend to reduce. So as an industry, we're seeing anywhere between 30 to 40% of a reduction in the first year, and then the trend slower gets a little bit slower years after that. But at least in the first year, about a 30 to 40% reduction.
All right, thank you. And your input, Daniel?
Yeah, I do like the word collaboration here, because I think as the property owners, property managers, they do want to collaborate with the tenants to make sure that the outcome for the tenants is, like Ephraim mentioned, fair allocation. I think that's an outcome that everybody wants to have happening. I think the other thing here that I'll add is, my understanding, property owners and managers are focused on, everybody's focused on their emissions right now, and scope 3 emissions are a big topic for these buildings, right? And the way that you can potentially impact that is this price signal that Ephraim's talking about. Putting the submeters in it should lead to that reduction of your scope 3 emissions, strictly through pay for what you use. And so talking about collaborating and how do you get everybody to agree that submetering is a good idea, I think that's a point that shouldn't be overlooked, is impacting your scope 3 emissions.
Thank you. And I think the words that stick with me are fair allocation and feeling like you're part of the solution. It empowers the tenant to feel like they are also part of climate action, which is so important. All right. Did I skip one? No, wait a sec. Okay, asking the right questions. So I understand you mentioned earlier, Ephraim, that when you get into a building, it takes quite an analysis of the space and the use of the space and how, things are divided up in the building and so on. So when you are trying to streamline the installation, how do you communicate with the tenants what it is you're looking at when you're going into their units, and how, like, what's the easy answer so that everybody feels there's some transparency? I think transparency is a word that goes well with collaboration and fair treatment. So let's have Daniel start with this one.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Audrey. Asking the right question is definitely important, and I think there's different perspectives here, right? From the perspective of the tenant who's going to have submeters installed in their space. For me, if I was a tenant, I would want to know that submeter is actually capturing the use for my space. And in a lot of these retrofit examples, when the distribution is unclear, it may not be so obvious where to put the submeter in. So I think having those conversations about, are you sure that that's where the submeter needs to go? Are you using revenue grade Measurement Canada approved meters? I think those are the right questions for a tenant to ask. What are we going to do with the data? Can I have access to that so I can be empowered and make decisions with the data? I think those are all great conversations that the tenant can have with the property owner and manager. But talking about collaborating here, I see a question on, do tenants need to collaborate with each other? I think what I would say there is submetering works well when it's deployed throughout the entire building. So if you're looking to do a one-off installation in a single tenant suite, that's not going to be very cost effective. And so the way to approach that, if you're a tenant and you want submetering in your building, is power in numbers, right? Getting the rest of the tenants educated, sharing these topics with them, so that you can all have an intelligent conversation with the property owner and manager about in-suite submetering. I think is, yeah, that's what I would add here for the collaboration piece.
Yeah.
Right. Sorry, Efren, I was just going to say, I feel like if I were a tenant, I don't want to just get a letter that says we are doing this, period. I would like to get a letter that says, this is what we're thinking about. We'd like your input. Can you tell us a little bit about how you use your space or something? So Efren, maybe you could elaborate a little bit on what's the tenant experience.
Yeah, I like that word collaboration. We are probably going to be adding it very shortly to everything that it is that we do. But the truth, I agree with everything Daniel said. Again, we seem to be aligned on almost everything except for the I think my company's better than. I'm just kidding. We're both really good at what it is that we do. Again, it just depends on relationships and partnerships. But the truth is that we are in the B to B business. So, the B2B portion is you own a building, it's our responsible and it's our sales team's responsibilities, and it's our project managers and engineers and quality people and tech people to make sure that the partnership we get into makes sense to everyone. It is then our responsibility really to take it to the next level and make sure that your tenants and your occupants are not only educated, but onboarded appropriately and properly, and make sure that it really is a collaboration between the teams and that everyone is really pulling in the same direction. The reality here is, folks think that, companies like Daniel's and our company, one of the questions we get asked during the education time, and I think this is an important point, Harry, I did see your hand again, but I think it's an important point. We don't make any money on the actual commodity. It's illegal to make money on the commodity. I think that's an important point. So, the usage is the usage. We are third-party service providers. So we both believe, Daniel and I both believe, that our companies provide better service, and potentially a local utility as an example. Why? You know, we're a for-profit business, but the reality is we're both for-profit businesses, obviously, just like you are. But the reality is that we actually care about what it is that we are doing. So the folks that are, you know, pulling and pushing levers every day, and the folks that are selling, and the folks that are project managing and engineering and answering the phones to make sure that the occupants are being treated fairly, actually care about reducing carbon footprints and the environment and everything that it is that we're experiencing every day. So how can we help? You know, this is our little piece in the world of how we can potentially help, you know, at least in, you know, nationally here and specifically within Southwestern Ontario and York region, how we can really help make a bit of a difference. So yes, it's education, it's collaboration, but it's also making people conscious of what it is that they're using, you know, maybe turning lights off and, you know, having the ability through companies like ours, you know, if a light's on at 2 o'clock in the morning, as an example, we've got the ability to potentially tell you that light is on at 2 o'clock in the morning and it shouldn't be on. So let's make sure that it's turned off, not only to save you a few dollars on the electricity bill, but to reduce our carbon footprint at the end of the day.
Great,
I love that. I'm just, Audrey, if you don't mind, just 30 seconds, I'll pick up on that
Yep.
because I think that I think what Ephraim is talking about there is the ongoing service that's tied to submetering, right? It's not just a meter sale. It's more than that. It's supporting the business on an ongoing basis and providing those services. And I think one of the really important services that property managers and owners need to understand is what happens when your tenants move in and out. How do you maintain the submetering system that's in there that you invested a lot of money in? How do you maintain that? And so that's a service that you need to look for to properly maintain it and manage the submeters after they've gone in. Because if a tenant moves out or if a wall moves, the submeter that was in there before is no longer doing what you want it to do.
Very good point. So you have a follow-up and a follow-through, and you are always there to continue to ensure that the operations and the data collection is right and correct.
Exactly. Yeah, it's more than just selling the meters. There's ongoing service tied to it, and I think that's the piece that Ephraim's talking about is making sure that it's working the way you want. And
now there's a building where, you know, everyone understands the future of that building. So it's great. I've got it, Harry. We're on to the next. We talked about a lot of benefits here. Information sharing through the data, which is really important. You know, the return on investment and the reductions that happen through the awareness and the transparency of energy use and water use, and the analytics that go along with it to help discover where you can reduce, and the accounting of just you can't measure what you don't, you can't manage what you don't measure. So until you see that data, are there any outstanding benefits that we have not touched on that you would like to talk about? And let's start with Ephraim.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we've touched on pretty much all of them at a high level. It's now we'd be digging in and getting into deeper conversations, which is fine. I think one of the biggest benefits are the folks, the people and the teams that we have behind the scenes. So I believe as an industry, submetering, third-party submetering providers like Metergy or Karma really do have the seasoned experts, the best people available in the marketplace today, in the Canadian marketplace, in York region specific, to be able to say this works and this doesn't. The collective experience between the companies, you know, specifically at Karma, you know, there's hundreds of years collectively of experience. Forget about the fact that we've been doing this for 40 years. Just, you know, the brain power that we've got, just making sure that it works day in and day out, and the best practice that we're able to collect from Vancouver to Halifax to everywhere in between and apply it in every region that we happen to be operating in, I think is a key benefit. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And if it works, that's great. And if it doesn't work, that's great. We will course correct and we will apply something else to make sure that, you know, we're bringing the best of both worlds together to whatever project we happen to be working on.
Thank you, because it is the people behind things that are so very important.
It's the only difference any of us have. It's the people.
Yeah. All right. Over to you, Daniel.
Awesome. Yeah, I love it. I'm just going to add on to that because I agree strongly with what you said, Ephraim. It is all about the people. And I'll just add at Metergy, we do have, you know, a number of people who come from an energy management, energy consulting background. So to your point about people caring about the outcomes and making sure that that we're working with the owners and managers to make sure they achieve their outcomes. You know, having that expertise, I think, goes a long way. It's interesting because, you know, the initial, you know, point of entry for submetering into a building is usually to make sure that the costs are distributed fairly between the tenants. But we're starting to have more and more conversations that are focused around ESG, sustainability initiatives. And so having that know-how, being able to help our clients direct, you know, what's right and where you don't necessarily need submeters is definitely an added benefit. Yeah.
I'm going to add one, and I thank you for your comments, Daniel. Right now, it's a very hot topic about, you know, business doing their annual reports and being transparent about how they are trying to reach net zero and how they are reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. And so if you are a business within a building, how do you put that into your annual report unless you have those numbers? So it's really about your brand credibility on the environmental and climate action side that is also going to benefit from you having this kind of transparency and this kind of data. So an important piece and becoming more important.
Simplifying your accounting and hitting your ESG initiatives. Yeah. I think the other one here is you know, when we see owners and managers making a lot of investments in their buildings to get to net zero, and so how do you validate your investment, right? You need submeters to measure what your savings are. So I think that's another benefit for sure is being able to validate your investments in other initiatives through measurement and verification.
Mm-hmm. So we're
Audrey, I remind people to use the chat if they have any questions, please.
Yes, please. Thank you, Harry. Now, everyone's always looking for a case study. Everyone always says, show it to me. I don't believe it, right, until we see it. But this is a proven business case that I found on Just Got Greener. What was the name of the company again? Well, it's a subsidiary of Karma Corp, but the heading on the article and the report was Shopping Just Got Greener because it is a shopping center, which is huge. So quite a job, you know, having to submeter all those spaces. It was, must have been quite the project, 95 retail tenants. So, you know, they were looking at ways to understand how to minimize electricity bills and, you know, have a transparency between everyone. So we had the objectives, you know, of decreasing annual operating costs and installing, you know, energy saving technology where they knew they should, and encouraging different tenant behavior and awareness, huge piece. And then accurate and timely tenant billing. So this solution, it was a 3-year savings of $186,000. So that's pretty amazing. But the bigger piece of this is the reduction of the carbon footprint, which is what we really, really need to focus on. You know, it's what we're all in this together for. So now, obviously, this is a Karma project. So Ephraim, if you would like to speak first to it, that would be great.
Sure.
Away you go.
Yeah. So I mean, you hit all the key points. Again, I liked what Daniel and I seem to be getting along. So maybe maybe a beer is in order sometime soon. But in the meantime, I like in a commercial project, walls tend to move. So you know, one of the things that we were heavily involved in, especially this project, not only during the initial implementation, but ongoing, is the fact that you want to make sure that you are partnering with someone who actually knows what they're doing, is dedicated to the business, and has a team to back it up. It's one thing to sell, it's another thing to sell and then to never hear from that company again, you know, until a contract is due kind of thing. That doesn't exist in the commercial submetering space. It can't exist in the commercial metering space because walls are moving all the time, you know, in a retail setting. And this one is not in York Region, but I mean, based on its size, you can probably assume which mall it is. Walls are moving all the time. Stores are shrinking, or they're growing, or maybe there's more office space coming in, or maybe there's kiosks in the middle, which is another source of revenue for the owner. So how do we, as a submetering provider, get involved versus, you know, those kiosks just getting charged to common area? They should really be responsible for what it is that they're using versus being allocated the same proportion as a larger retail shop would be, having an actual physical space. So this is an ongoing project, just like any other commercial setting would be. We're making sure that we're on top of things. There's, it's the kind of thing where in this case specifically, there are bi-weekly meetings, as an example, quarterly business reviews to make sure that, targets that we've set for the program are still being hit, are still on the verge of being achieved, and making sure that we are addressing anything that changes. And then, from the flip side of things, when you have a commercial submetering program that is truly up and running and managing and running the way it should be, we're all of a sudden able to affect other things. Like we mentioned the example before of being able to turn lights off, being integrated into the business infrastructure system, whatever the case may be, but being able to turn lights off that shouldn't be on, or at least making someone aware, the property manager, the super, the building manager, aware of the fact that, the HVAC system is going at 2 a.m. It should really only be turned on at 5:30 or 6, to get the building or commercial setting ready for when folks show up. We know that lights don't necessarily need to be on, or at least all the lights, maybe just emergency lights, but all the lights don't need to be on, between the hours of midnight and 4. And if they are, and maybe someone hit a manual switch by accident, all of a sudden we can trigger an alarm, and people are made aware of it so that we can actually affect change. And it's not simply, it's one thing to have the information. It's another thing to be able to actually do something about it. And there's 2 parts to that. We can actually affect things in somewhat real time, but then be able to provide the reporting back to that building manager or commercial setting manager to say, here's the information, here's what we recommend. Let's come up with a plan based on what we are going to create together, and let's action it, versus here's a whole bunch of information, goodbye and good luck. That is absolutely not the way it works.
Yeah, I can see it's a huge project. Daniel, we are getting short on time. We need to leave 5 minutes for Harry to do some slides at the end. Do you have anything that you'd like just to?
Yeah, there were a couple of interesting things that I just wanted to touch on there. Ephraim talking about the walls moving and putting new submeters in or moving them. A lot of the times we'll get involved with the electrical contractors or the designers to inform better design. And so I think that another added benefit of engaging the
right. How about pre-construction consultations?
100%.
Right.
We do that. That's a big part of what we do.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be extremely valuable.
We try to shift people's mentality away from, well, you just submeter it, like that's easy, put another submeter on it, right? There's a better way to do it, and it ends up costing less for them in the long run. So you think that's not to our benefit, but long-term partnerships are really important. The other thing I wanted to touch on here was you talked about HVAC being on or lights being on. Again, great point. Some of the people that we're working with, they actually use the submeter data to supplement a data analytics program that they're running at their mall. So they're pulling data analytics from HVAC systems directly, and then they supplement that with submeter data to draw conclusions about how can we better run the mall. So it's another piece of data that they can use to improve their operations.
Very good. So Harry, I know we're short. I'm just going to say that we'll show this slide. I have read articles about submetering for the last 3 weeks solid, and I will tell you that tenants appreciate submetering. They feel their lease is fair, they are identified as sustainability leaders, and they see the return on investment. So we're not going to go into a question period with this one, but we did have a question in the chat, and if we want to ask that question, Harry, you can let me know if we have time. I know you're tight here.
Yeah, well, we'll work it through. I think one of the questions that came up even prior to the session is what are the alternatives if you're not able to submeter?
Yeah, Mike.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Sure. Yeah, I can take that one. I mean, we've talked about it already. In a building where you have tenants that use a similar amount of electricity use, so an office building, it might be entirely reasonable to allocate on square foot. Certainly, it's not going to be entirely fair. But if submetering is not an option, then that's generally an acceptable practice. I'd caution you. You want to look out for those office buildings that have a data center operating on the 7th floor, and then small office spaces on all the other floors. That's no longer fair.
You want to add to that, Ephraim?
That Daniel articulated it well. It's because we're allocating, we would come up with a rate by square foot. And yeah, in that example specifically, if someone has a whole bunch of servers and someone else, using a whole bunch of electricity and someone else doesn't, the allocation obviously won't be fair. But there are alternatives if there's no other solution.
Speaking about other solutions, another question we had on the chat: have you ever seen any circumstances where the local utility offers incentives for submetering?
Yes.
At one point you did.
Wow.
Talk about it a bit, Efren.
Yeah, I mean, at a high level, this probably deserves a little bit more than 30 seconds. But at a high level, everyone is good at what it is that they do. Everyone has different incentives. Every region or municipality has different incentives depending on what's important politically, what's going on specifically in that area at any given time. Again, what I would argue is Daniel's business and our business, we are for-profit businesses, but we have people who are industry experts who live and breathe submetering every day. It's not something that's at the side of a table that they do, as an add-on. This is quite literally what we do. This is our business. You're dealing with the experts.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up here, but I'll leave the last 20 seconds to you, Daniel. Anything you want to add on that?
No, I think we're good. Yeah, we'll save the time for the other question. I see there's some other questions in here if we want to tackle those.
Well, we don't have to shut this down. If there's somebody with a specific question they'd like to ask after Harry's finished, please stay on and we'll get you an answer best we can. Okay.
You can go to the next slide then. Yeah, so I was unbelievably impressed with the numbers that both Daniel and Efren were throwing around. 35 to 40% savings in the first year. I'm sure that's not on a sustained basis, and you made that comment, but it certainly speaks to the economics of submetering. And as Audrey mentioned too, our focus really is, yes, the economics is important, but we're seeing now more and more of the tenants and building owners we talk to that GHG reductions is an important key contribution. In fact, it's kind of taking over, and that's what we're here to do with the Climatewise Building Challenge. We're here to assist you, tenants and building owners, to achieve an action plan that reduces your greenhouse gases, to take action on climate change while at the same time saving some dollars. Audrey, we certainly appreciate the enlightenment that Efren and Daniel have brought on the benefits of submetering. There are many benefits to being involved in the Climatewise Building Challenge. You certainly expect more information like this. We've done sessions before on green leases and regulations. Certainly the bottom line savings we talked about, understanding the incentives that are available to you, and importantly, engaging your employees in taking action on climate change. And we heard a lot about collaboration today, but it's all about being part of a movement. And that's what we're trying to create in York Region and elsewhere in Ontario, a movement to take action on climate change, to be part of the solution to the existential crisis we're dealing with respect to climate. Audrey? And not only do we provide you with the opportunity to get recognized for your actions through the Climatewise Building Challenge and the annual event we do, but we also have an affiliation with BOMA and their CREST Awards and the winners in our Climatewise Building Challenge, and escalate to the BOMA CREST Awards, which are happening in the October of this year. So take a look at our website for more information on how that can happen. And speaking of recognition, we also are leadership here in terms of recognition, in terms of what tenants can do. The EPA in the States has a tenant recognition program, and we are in the process of trying to import that program into Canada, and using Climatewise Building Challenge and our focus on York Region to conduct a pilot study. So if you're interested in our tenant-based recognition program and how you as a tenant can be recognized for taking action, again, you can look at our website, see the kind of work that we're doing, and perhaps reach out to either myself or Audrey to be part of our pilot project that's will be initiated in the coming month. Next slide. More to come about it in September. This is our June 1st session. I really appreciate Daniel and Efren's contribution to the work today. More coming in September, October, and another session in November. Lots of people already working with us, like the 407, all of the municipalities in York Region are part of the Climatewise Building Challenge, and this list is actually outdated. We can now add a number of other key organizations like RBC to our Climatewise Building Challenge. Take a look at our website, Fall Ecology Center at windfallcenter.ca to find out more about the Climatewise Building Challenge. I want to thank you again, Ephraim and Daniel, for being part of this knowledge exchange with our participants on today's session. We look forward to working with you both in the coming months on other related activities. Thank you for your time today, and thank you all for joining us for this fourth session in our webinar series on the Climatewise Building Challenge.
Thank you, Harry. And if anyone had some more questions, if you want to just stick around for a minute, we would be happy to address them quickly. I see one from DJ here. So
We addressed some of those questions.
Did we address these? Okay.
Yeah, we talked about the incentives.
Okay, so
I can pick up on that one if you'd like, Audrey. On the incentives, it's through the IASO, and there used to be incentives through the Save on Energy program. My understanding is those are no longer available for submetering. They do still have incentives for other retrofits, though.
Oh, that's good to know. I mean, it's interesting. Incentives aren't always, being shouted from the rooftop. You need to go search for them.
They're changing all the time, so
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
There's also a question on regulators. Is there a regulator at the provincial level?
Yes, we are regulated under the Ontario Energy Board in Ontario for electricity.
Very good question, DJ. And the last question is, on an average, how long is a typical submetering contract with companies like Karma or Metergy? Sounds like a lifetime, though. It's an ongoing contract. Daniel, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we're focused on commercial, and typically we don't require a term contract for commercial submetering. The way it works is the owners and managers purchase the meters themselves, and we're happy to provide ongoing service for monthly fees, but we don't actually require an ongoing. We don't require a term contract. It's different for multi-use residential, but I won't speak to that.
Okay, good to know. Ephraim, you're
same idea. So I mean, we've recently for smaller properties, we've opened up a bit of a hybrid model where there's now potentially the opportunity for us to finance and put the building on a shorter termed agreement. But again, there's levers that you can pull and push, DJ. And what I would say is if you're interested in learning more, by all means, reach out to Daniel or myself, and we can talk about the specifics to your project in more detail.
okay. There we go. Any other questions? Because I see we still have quite a few people on. Oh, we have a new message. Let's have a look here. Oh, DJ's saying thank you.
Thank you.
DJ. Well, we're going to wrap it up. 4 minutes over. That's really not too bad. We did very well. And we had some great discussions going on. I know that I know far more about submetering than I ever did. And I know where to go if I want to submeter to the experts. And thank you for your insights, Daniel and Ephraim. And thank you to everybody for attending today. It's very important that we move forward in these directions. So thank you for taking the time out of your day to be here.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Harry, I'm just staying on for a minute because I like to see that the recording link comes through in the chat. And so often I shut it down and then I say, oh no, I need to go back and get the link for the recording. So